Hey everybody, Josh from SILCA here. Today we're going to talk about how to wrap your handlebar tape. Specifically, we'll go into detail about some of the features of our new NASTRO Piloti tape. But the stuff we're going to show you here today, it really applies to all the tape products on the market, with a few exceptions that we'll note as we get into it. So let me first start with NASTRO Piloti. This tape is not your ordinary bar tape. Quick plug for this product. We developed this based on a foam designed for a running shoe. One of the big companies was trying to make a more efficient running shoe to try to break the 2-hour marathon mark. And so they've come up with a foam that is about 15% higher rebound and about 10% softer. What that means in a bar tape is that the foam is able to rebound more quickly under your hands, so that you're not just kind of bottoming out on compacted foam. You think of riding chip and seal, you might smash the foam against the handlebar, and then as you're riding over those high frequency vibrations, you're really just riding on a bottomed out piece of foam. It's almost purely rigid at that point. With this technology, the foam's able to rebound just that much more, and so you're getting a little bit more cushion. When you test it for energy, our 1.85 millimeter tape is actually more comfortable than any 2.5 millimeter tape on the market. And our 2.5 millimeter tape is more comfortable than any of the 3.2 millimeter tapes. This technology also allows us to top coat the tape with a material called TPU. And this is a material commonly found in like high-end sunglass nose pieces, ear bridges. It's modifiable in a bunch of ways, but we've done it here for wet grip. And so you'll find that the NASTRO line of tape actually has about 90% of the dry grip is retained when the tape is wet. So if you're in the rain, you sweat a lot, you're using it for indoor, you're going to find that this gives you more grip, both wet and dry, than anything else out there, along with better cushioning. And because it's these super modern materials developed for racing shoes, it also happens to be really light, a lot lighter than some of the other products out there on the market. So check it out. All right, so I've got my NASTRO removed from the packaging. It's here. You will notice that it comes with this awesome aluminum expanding end plug. You plug it in at the end and tighten it down to stay put. One of the reasons we need that is the tape has so much rebound and is so actually strong and tough that it will push a traditional cheap plastic end plug. It'll push it just right out the back. And so we do this cool expanding version that I'll show you how to use here in a second. The other thing you will notice when you unbox this tape is that instead of something that looks like this, a little 1.5 inch long piece of scrap tape used to cover the back of the brake lever, you are going to find this. And we call this the butterfly. This is a piece that I honestly dreamed up when I was probably 15 years old working in a bike shop, so a long time ago, really as a way to solve the frustration of making this sort of climbing spiral wrap around the back of the brake hood. You know, as we've gone from the old school levers to the new school levers, you've got, you know, hydraulics in here, the levers have gotten taller, and really the tape hasn't kind of kept up, and they've become ever harder to wrap. If you're really particular like I am about these sorts of things, it's the kind of situation that'll drive you nuts. So you can see we've replaced this little piece with this piece that is more than twice the surface area, and best of all is 100% covered in high-strength 3M adhesive on the back. And so let's look at why we want that. I'm going to fold my hoods forward. So I've got a nice clean bar here. If I didn't have that, I'd want to remove any tape on the bar. I'm a big fan of the SILCA gear wipe for removing any residue or any of the other stuff that would be left on the bar. You really want it nice and clean. It's also a good time when you've got it out to inspect for cracks, any damage, you know, scraping. You know, the carbon bars of today are not the 300-gram aluminum bars that we had 25 years ago. They're a little bit more delicate. It's always nice to just inspect and make sure before you get started. So in the old world, we would take this tape, we'll peel the backing off of it, and stick it behind the hood, and you can pretty instantly see the problem here. So, you know, I'm going to stick it behind my hood, and it's going to promptly unstick itself. Why this is a challenge is that as you're wrapping, and really trying to be careful here, this guy needs to stay put, and he may need to be repositioned depending on how how your tape is going to lay on your particular lever and your particular bar. The ultimate problem with this guy is that he's just not tall enough. It's not quite enough surface area, and he just took care of himself, and he doesn't, he has too much bulk in a sense. So, you know, once we've gone to thicker foam tapes, which really started in the late 80s, early 90s, what happened was you were unable to do the over-under, oftentimes called the figure 8 or the tourniquet wrap that was common years ago. You couldn't do that anymore because as the tape got thicker, you had the thick piece of tape in the back, and then all of that added thickness, you'd end up with sort of like a baseball of foam back here. When you laid your lever hood down, that would stick out. And so I'm sure you've seen bikes in the Peloton on the group ride where this guy is just sticking all out in space. You got a big blob of tape back here. It doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good. What we've done with the Butterfly, and I will get him peeled here, is full adhesive coverage. He goes in this orientation, and he is actually designed to line up with all of the popular modern hoods. You can see here's the locating feature in the hood, here's the locating feature in the lever body itself. He's cuttable and tunable if you don't particularly like what you see, but you can wrap him around, fold him up under. You now have full and complete coverage of, again, twice the surface area you would have had, and because there's no foam, you actually get it without adding any bulk to this area here, right? So we're going to get him on. Just kind of adjust him back. Okay, so I've got my Butterfly in place, and he stays put just like we want. And now let's start with our tape. So we get him, remove the cellophane. Now, the Nastro Piloti has two textures. If you can see here on the camera, there's a medium texture and a high texture. And so we call this high grip and ultra high grip. You know, the ultra high textured design is great if you're doing cyclocross, wet riding, rain riding. Ironically, indoor training is perfect for this, right? Because there's so much sweat and salt that accumulates. Having the additional texture really can be helpful in that. If you want it to be a little bit less texture, if you wear gloves, that sort of thing, you can run it on the slightly lower textured side. It's really your preference. Just be mindful when you're wrapping that the direction of the wrap is obviously going to change which texture you're running on. So here we've also got our 3M damping adhesive on the back, one of my favorite products. Adds just a tiny bit of damping. You know, we've removed damping from the foam. That's about a 0.1 damping coefficient compared to about a 0.5 for most brands. But adding this type of adhesive that has its own damping helps kill some of that road buzz. You think of running over something like a chip and seal, and you get that little bit of vibration here at the end of the bar. This helps knock that down without over damping the squishiness of the tape under your hand. So kind of a fun way that we can tune the ride quality of the tape. Now, I'm going to look at my, my setup here, and I'm going to need to start at the other end of the tape to run the texture that I want to run. So let's pull it out. And then we can talk about directionality, where to start. You know, I see a lot of times people will start at the top and wrap down. In my world, that is wrong. You know, I know there's some good thinking behind that. I know that's how a lot of people do it, but my experience, 25 years of doing this, pro tour, pro racing, my own bikes, working in bike shops since I was a kid, if you wrap from the top and come down, you're just not going to get the life out of the tape that you would have if you started at the bottom and came up. And not only starting at the bottom and coming up, but you want to start on the inside of the bar and wrap out. So on this side of the bike, we're wrapping clockwise. And on the non-drive side of the bike, you're wrapping counterclockwise, starting at the end. That really is going to give you the longest life, the best longevity in the tape, particularly up here. We think about your hands, the weight tends to want to roll the tape this way. Wrapping with this style, it actually tightens itself as opposed to loosening itself if you were to wrap it the other way. So I will start peeling. The way I've always done it, and I know a lot of mechanics do it this way, you want to start on the inside, right here. I'll try to make that visible for you. Start on the inside, and I start inside here and midway through the tape, about a third of the tape hanging off the back. And I like to give it one full kind of tight wrap before I start spiraling. And that just gives an extra little bit of thickness there. You know, as your hands are moving, you can kind of feel the thickness change. It gives you a little bulge, and it's just a little almost subliminal message to your body when your hands are moving around that that's where the end of the bar starts. It's a subtle detail, but it just gives it a nice look. Now that I've got it, I'm going to start pulling tight. Different brands recommend differently with our tape. The tape is so strong that you really want to pull a nice tension with it to keep it in place. Do not worry about breaking it. I know a lot of brands out there say you know, not to pull too tight. You can damage it. This stuff is so strong, you are not going to damage it.
All of these modules are just shaped.
Okay, so we've wrapped up, taking our time and keeping some tension in it. You can see everything's laying nice and smooth. And now I'm at the lever, and there's two schools of thought with the lever. So I want to kind of go through both of them here so you can understand or choose the method that you like. Most people nowadays, as tape has gotten thicker, use what I would call the spiral staircase. And the spiral staircase is essentially, we're going to continue to spiral, maybe go one more under, and then spiral back over this side. And we're going to allow the finishing tape here, the butterfly tape, to cover any gaps that appear. With some of the levers out there, I know I ride Campy, and with the Campy levers, they're a little bit taller, and it's pretty hard to get it done without leaving a gap. You might find yourself going back and forth, you know, 10, 15 times, but that's a pretty common and popular way to do it. Now, in the old days, we had what we called figure eight. Some people called it the tourniquet, and it's not so common anymore, but with this butterfly being thin, you can do it again. And so I will show it to you if you've never seen it. It's kind of a cool method. So what we do is, you see we still have a little bit of a gap here. I'm going to go ahead and pull some tension, and I'm going to come back up and over, kind of intentionally leaving a gap. And then over the top of the hood, come back down, again, keep your tension, and now pick up that piece on the bottom here. Again, the tension is really the key. And then as I come back over the top, we are fully covered. And I think, you know, this really, to me, this is the classic look. You know, when you look back and you see those awesome photos of Merckx or you know, any of the folks in the 80s racing, you know, you essentially would have had a cotton or a cello tape with this style of wrap. It gives you really beautiful coverage, and you can get it done again here without making it overly bulky for the brake hood. And so that's how we're going to go ahead and finish this wrap with figure eight. If you prefer the spiral staircase, go for it. I've done that for years as well, and I've definitely found up until this tape, especially if you were going with something thick, like a 3mm tape, you really couldn't get away with this. And the spiral staircase is what you're after. But since we're using the Piloti today, and we've got the butterfly piece, we'll go with it. Also, you'll notice I am not pre-peeling the entire tape, and there's a good reason for that. Oftentimes you see people, and this used to drive me nuts in my shop days, that you can pre-peel the whole tape and it gets this backing tape out of the way, but what happens is as the tape dangles, it's touching the floor, it's touching your pants, you know, if you're a mechanic, it's touching your apron, right? All of those things can be dirty, greasy, dusty. The whole time it's picking up all of that stuff, and then as you're wrapping it down, it's either now going to, you know, take those little particles of dirt and grease and grit and grime, and it's either going to rub them into your handlebar or it's going to stick it into the adjacent little bit of tape. Either way, it is not good for the longevity of the tape, right? You don't want to wrap a bunch of dirt and other garbage into your beautiful tape job. So that's why I don't you know, pre-strip the backing tape. It looks a little bit messy as we do it, but it's pretty manageable. Okay, so I'm here at the end of the tape, and I have wrapped what I would kind of call single wrap, right? I've gone with a pretty even wrap top and bottom. I still have tape left. A lot of times, and this is totally your choice, you might want to wrap a little bit more densely at the top, right? We've got the extra space. If I overlapped by less, I could use this extra tape to actually build a little bit more thickness in the flats of the bar here. Again, that's your choice how you want to do it. This particular bar is already oversized. It's a full 31/8 from about here up. And so for my taste, this particular bar is already a little thicker than I'd like it to be, so I'm going to wrap thin. But again, it's totally up to you. If you want it thicker, wrap it thicker. If you want it nice and thin, like we have it here, go for it. Now, we're going to get to the finishing tape piece of this, and here's a couple other, I think, tips, tricks, maybe pet peeves of mine, because I'm particular. I feel like one of the things that you commonly see is people will try to finish the wrap by pulling out of the spiral and wrapping it straight and then coming back in with the finishing tape. And what that means is that you have to cut the tape in a way that leaves an exposed foam edge on the grip side of the tape. It leaves an exposed foam here if you're cutting this way. I see a ton of that when I'm out riding and out working events, right? That people have cut the tape this way, wrapped it, finished tape. The way I learned it years ago from one of my favorite pro mechanics in Europe is really quite simple, and I think it's quite elegant. It's to keep your spiral going. You can see we've got our spiral nice, so the tape is coming off at the angle that we had. And what I'm really going to do is just make a sight line here with my scissor. I'm going to take the scissors and kind of create a sight line, and I'm going to cut the tape off in a straight line running this way. And we'll see what that's going to get us. This is the other thing you will notice with the Nastro tapes. This TPU is so tough that if you don't have new sharp scissors, it can be a bear to cut, unlike some of the other foams out there. So make sure you've got a nice sharp pair of scissors or it will give you a fit. So as I continue wrapping my spiral, what I end up with is this little tab that folds over and gives me a nice, kind of a nice clean edge. Pull a little bit more tension in that. And all of the cut foam now, you see I'm consistent lip on the inside of the tape here, and all of the cut sides of my foam are now on this side, okay? And that's going to just keep things a little bit neater and tidier, and it also keeps from giving you like a big extra bit of bulk right here, unless that's what you're after. If that's what you're after, go for it. So I've got my little tab sticking up. I like, before I get into the finishing tape, I like to do a little wrap of electrical tape just to keep this guy down. You don't have to, but you might find with your finishing tape application that you have to fight the little the tape wanting to pull itself out. So I'm going to do a little wrap here. Just start on my end.
All of these modules are just shaped by the electricity.
Go. It's kind of hard to do this from the side. I would normally do this from the front, where you have a little bit better sight line, but obviously if I'm in the front, then you can't see it. So we get that down. Honestly, you could finish it here, and I would say with most of the tapes that I have experience with, this is where I would finish this project. Most finishing tapes are pretty terrible in terms of the adhesive, the look, the feel, the stretchiness. You know, we worked really hard on the SILCA NASTRO finishing tape. This is the same TPU that we use as the top coating on the tape itself. So it's ultra strong, it's very stretchy, it's got a nice soft touch, and it's full 3M high strength adhesive on the back. So if you're going to use the finishing tape, this is my advice to you. You want whatever tape you use to wrap in this direction forward, and you want the seam to finish at the bottom down here. And the reason you want that is that it's the least touched place on the finishing, on this part of the tape, and it's the place that's the hardest. Your finger's the least likely to catch it and pull it forward. It's also, having it at the bottom any sweat or water that gets on there will drip off and not want to sit on the seam and climb under the adhesive. So if you think about it from the point of view of the adhesive, it's the cleanest place to really keep stuff out and to keep your fingers from mucking it up. And so what you're going to want to do is start by kind of playing with where the tape has to start for where it's going to finish. And so I'm finishing here a little bit forward of what I want. I'm going to go back. I'm going to pull it forward maybe a little bit, wrap it down. That's just about perfect. I'm going to unwrap it and see that my starting point was right here. Now, your bars may differ, right? This bar is pretty thick, but we've wrapped it a little bit thin. If you're thicker or thinner, that's going to change the circumference necessary, and so your starting point may vary from the starting point that we've shown here. So I'm looking at that. I'm starting probably in that 10, 11 o'clock position. And what I'm going to do now is peel only half of it and leave the final piece unpeeled. Why are we not peeling that? Same reason we didn't pre-peel the whole length of the tape. Adhesive that's been touched by your skin will pick up the oils and the dirt from the skin. And so if you want this tape job to last a long time, you need the adhesive contact to be as clean as possible. And so we're going to keep this covered so that it can stay clean, and we're going to peel it right at the very end and then stick it down and never touch it again. So I will take my finishing tape here from the back. And this is a little tricky for video. Typically I would stand in the front and wrap this, but obviously if I do that you can't see it. So we're going to be a little bit awkward here, but we're going to wrap around. Everything looks nice. We're happy with that. And what I'm going to do now is start to slowly peel and lay down the tape as we go. With the idea that when we take this off, we now smooth it up with our finger, make sure it's nice and stuck down, and then we never touch it again. I think anyone who's experienced any sort of, like it's true with duct tape or scotch tape, any tape, where you've touched it is where it's going to start to peel. So if we can kind of close it off with completely clean adhesive to substrate contact, it's going to last much, much longer. So there we are. We're in a place to get our hoods kind of rolled back down. You can see, despite using the figure eight, right, the bulkiest method here, we're not bulky. I mean, I think it looks great. We've got no exposed empty areas. The hoods lay really beautifully down. I'm pleased with that. Okay, so now that we're finished, I'm going to go ahead and get my end cap, and I'm going to need a 3mm hex key. And so what I want to do is make sure that I'm not pulled up too tight yet, that it's going to fit in the bar. It will, because as I tighten this, this is going to pull back and expand this wedge. So we want to make sure it's the right size to go in, it's not too tight before I start. And what I'm going to do, and again, I would normally do this from the front, kind of pulling it back to me, but so you can see, we are going to really work to tuck that full circumference of tape into the bar. And we're going to use the friction from the plug sliding in to pull it the rest of the way in. So you see that the plug is now held in place by the friction of the thickness of the tape, kind of pinching it in place. But we're going to add to that by giving it a little bit of help, pushing it in a little further, and then using our SILCA hex key, I'm going to expand that out. There we go. And with that, you now have the plug, the end plug sticking really all the way up to about here, flared out, touching the inside of the bar, the other side of the tape. This end plug cannot fall out by the way it's designed, as long as you've got it nice and tightened in place. So with that, there you have it. We have one side completely done and wrapped. I think it looks beautiful. White tape always looks pro, as they say. And now we're going to go to the other side, and we're going to repeat the exact same steps, but in reverse, making sure that We start on the inside here, and we wrap counterclockwise on this side of the bar. Again, finishing wrap forward with our finishing tape. So I will get that done on the other side, and we will have new bar tape day to go enjoy in tonight's ride.